Okay, let's just jump right in. Picture this. It's 2017. You're in a courtroom. A judge makes a ruling, and they're citing a specific law, pulling it right from the state's official website. Seems straightforward, right? Well, there was one tiny problem. That law? It didn't exist anymore. It had been amended, but the very database that was supposed to be the single source of truth was completely out of date. Now, this wasn't just a simple typo. No, this was a massive crack in the foundation of our legal system, and it was all because of a hidden technical flaw in how we keep track of our laws. And you can see the problem laid out perfectly right here. On the left, that's the version of the statute the court was looking at. But on the right, that's the law as it actually was. So you have a court operating on totally outdated information provided by a system everyone was supposed to trust. And this incident, it wasn't just some one-off glitch. Nope. It was a blaring warning sign that something was seriously wrong with the digital backbone of our justice system.
So what did this lead to? Well, it created what you can only really call a lawful confusion. You had lawyers, regular citizens, even other judges suddenly realizing that there were multiple, conflicting versions of the same law floating around on different websites. The very system that was designed to bring clarity was instead just creating total chaos.
And this is the part that's so important to get. The legislative process, the actual passing of laws, that was working just fine. The failure here was purely technical. The digital copy of the law had become disconnected from the actual law. It basically created this phantom legal landscape where old, outdated rules look like they were still in full effect.
And that brings us to the real technical guts of the issue, what I'm calling the versioning void. See, in that big rush to get all our laws online, to digitize mountains of legal text, a really critical step got skipped. And, well, it had some pretty massive consequences.
What's so wild about this is that the solution to this whole mess was already being used every single day in a completely different world. Software development. It's called version control. It's how teams of programmers can all work on the same project without just deleting each other's work. It tracks every single change, who made it, and exactly when. But for our laws, without it, every time a law was amended, it was like hitting save and overwriting the old file. The previous version was just gone. There was no clear history, and definitely no single source of truth. And the fallout from this was immediate, and it was everywhere. You had courts making decisions based on bad info. You had everyday people just trying to figure out their rights, being totally misled. It caused this mad scramble from legal tech companies and open government groups, all pushing for something called canonical time-stamped databases. Basically, a single, authoritative source that everybody could finally trust. So, how did we even get here? I mean, how does such a huge, fundamental flaw get baked right into the system? To get that, we actually have to take a quick look back at how we've stored and shared legal information throughout history. This timeline really tells the whole story. For hundreds of years, the law was static. It was printed in these big, bound books. It was official, sure, but also super inaccessible to most people. Then came the first step into digital, just scanning those pages into PDFs. Better, but you couldn't really search them. The real revolution was the searchable web portal. All of a sudden, the law was at your fingertips. But in the race to make that happen, versioning, well, it was seen as this complicated extra feature, not a core requirement. So now, the goal is to finally get to that last step. Databases that aren't just searchable, but are real-time, fully version-controlled, and 100% reliable.
Now, this isn't just some abstract technical problem for database geeks. The consequences here, they go so much deeper. Because when the fundamental data of our own government becomes unreliable, it starts to chip away at our trust in the institutions themselves.
I mean, really think about that for a second. If you can't be sure that the law you're reading online is the actual law, what does that do to your faith in the whole justice system? What happens to the idea of the rule of law when the rules themselves become all blurry and inconsistent?
And this quote just nails it. For a government to work, for a society to believe in its own legal system, the data has to be canonical. That just means it has to be the one official, authoritative version. The minute you have multiple, fragmented versions floating around, you don't just have a database problem, you have a crisis of faith in justice itself. But here's the good news. This whole crisis, as bad as it was, also showed us the path forward. Because the problem is so clear, the solution is too. We now have a blueprint for how to build legal databases that aren't just easy to use, but are actually worthy of our trust.
So the solution really boils down to these 4 key ideas. First, you have to enforce strict version control. Every single change gets a timestamp. No exceptions. Second,
You don't just overwrite the old text, you have to track the lineage of every amendment, so there's a clear historical record. Third, all of this history needs to be completely transparent and available to the public. And finally, all of this work leads to one goal: establishing a single canonical source that courts, lawyers, and all of us can rely on, no questions asked.
And let's be absolutely clear about what the stakes are here. This isn't just about good data management or clean code. Having access to clear, accurate, and unambiguous law is one of the fundamental pillars of a democracy. And in our digital world, that means the integrity of our databases is directly tied to the health of our democracy.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. The next time you're online looking up a local rule or a state law, just pause for a second and ask yourself, how do I know, really know, that the text on my screen is the actual, current, and complete law? Because as we've just seen, the answer to that question is way more complicated than it ever should be.